Imagine this. You're standing alone in your kitchen at 2:17 a.m. The silence is suffocating. No music, no hum of the refrigerator, just you and your clenched fists. Your chest rises and falls in short, sharp bursts. You don't remember what triggered it. Maybe it was a text you didn't get, a memory that blindsided you, or just the unbearable weight of being misunderstood for the 100th time. But there it is, burning in your veins like wildfire, anger, not the kind you can rationalize. Not irritation. Not frustration. Not the polished, socially acceptable kind that gets funneled into polite complaint. No, this is the raw, unspeakable fury that makes your vision blur, that tightens your jaw until it hurts, that makes you want to scream into the void until it finally screams back. But instead, you do what you've always done. You breathe, you repress, you tell yourself, calm down. This isn't worth it. Don't be irrational. And just like that, the fire is buried again, deep beneath the smiling mask you wear for the world. You call it maturity. Society calls it control. But what if it's not? What if your anger is not your enemy, but your most honest, uncorrupted truth? What if every time you silenced it, you weren't becoming stronger, but smaller? What if the very thing you've been told to extinguish is the one force that could finally set you free? Because here's the paradox that should stop you cold. What if anger, not love, is the missing key to your self-actualization? Think about that. We're taught from the moment we can speak to be kind, to be good, to be nice, to manage our emotions, to let things go, to keep the peace, to forgive. But peace, without justice, is spiritual anesthesia, and forgiveness, without boundaries, is self-betrayal. Your rage, that storm within you, isn't an error in the system. It is the system screaming that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. Now, imagine what would happen if you stopped apologizing for it. What if, instead of denying your anger, you walked straight into it? What would you discover on the other side? Would you meet the version of you that never let anyone walk over her again? Would you hear, perhaps for the first time, the voice of the child inside you that was silenced too soon? Would you finally recognize that the part of you society calls unpleasant is the only part of you that still remembers how to say no? Here's something no one tells you. Anger is not weakness. It is willpower before it's filtered. It is truth before it's socialized. It is the soul before it's censored. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the world works so hard to tame it. Because nothing is more dangerous to a complacent world than a human being who has awakened to the sacred power of their own rage. But here's the tragedy. We've been gaslit into fearing our own fire. We call it toxic. We shame it. We suppress it. We make anger a diagnosis. And in doing so, we strip ourselves of one of the last raw forces of emotional sovereignty. So ask yourself this. What if you've spent your whole life suppressing the one emotion that never lied to you? What if your anger wasn't something to get over, but something to listen to? What is it trying to protect? What boundary is it warning has been crossed? What dream did someone trample that still hasn't healed? What injustice are you pretending doesn't exist, just to be liked, accepted, or spiritually evolved? And now ask the question you've never dared to face. If your anger had a voice, and you actually let it speak, what would it scream? Would it scream about the years you wasted being small to make others comfortable? Would it scream about the betrayals you minimized just to keep the peace? Would it scream about the version of you that's dying a slow death behind closed doors, smiling while silently begging for rescue? You've been taught to think anger is the problem. But what if it's the proof that you're still alive beneath the layers? What if it's the only emotion that hasn't yet bowed to the throne of conformity? And so, the question is no longer how do I control my anger, but something far more terrifying. What will happen if I keep silencing it? We're about to go deeper, much deeper, because the roots of this go beyond emotion. They stretch into psychology, mythology, philosophy, and the very fabric of society itself. Your anger didn't start with you, but it might just end with you. Let's go underground. Let's uncover the hidden forces that taught you to fear your fire. It didn't begin with you. The way you flinch when you're upset, the way your throat tightens when you're trying not to overreact, the shame that bubbles up the moment you feel heat in your chest. This response, this instinct to bury your anger, wasn't born from your essence. It was carved into you, like erosion shaping stone, quiet, slow, relentless. You were trained to fear your own fire, not with chains or commands, but with something far more effective: expectation. It was in the way teachers praised the quiet ones, in how you were scolded for talking back, even when you were just telling the truth, in the way adults said, "That's not how a good boy behaves," or "Nice girls don't act like that." Good, nice, polite, calm, 4 golden cages dressed as virtues, and the wild, raging force inside you, it never had a chance. Carl Jung once said, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers." We misunderstand this. We think the tortured are those who scream, those who rage, but perhaps the most tortured are the ones who do either. The ones who suppress their fury so deeply it turns into self-doubt, then depression, then spiritual amnesia, because repressed anger doesn't disappear. It mutates, and here lies the hidden problem. When we bury our anger, we bury a part of ourselves that knows how to protect, assert, rebel, and create. And what remains is a diluted version of us, fragile, agreeable, disconnected from purpose. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, "He who cannot howl will not find his pack." But we've been declawed. We've been taught to purr when we should roar. Philosophically, this dilemma is ancient. Stoics cautioned against anger, seeing it as a threat to reason. Religions told us to turn the other cheek. Spiritual communities often confuse passivity with enlightenment, as if silence in the face of injustice is a sign of higher consciousness. But what if that's a lie? What if, as Viktor Frankl suggested, what is to give light must endure burning? And your anger is not a flaw, but the fuel? Our culture conditions us to seek peace. Externally, we avoid conflict. We use words like zen and centered to describe the ideal state. But peace that comes from avoidance is not peace. It's paralysis. And paralysis is the death of growth. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great pessimist, believed that suffering is the root of human experience. But he also knew that denial of pain only breeds more suffering. And anger? Anger is pain that remembers it still deserves to be heard. Psychologically, anger is primal. It emerges when boundaries are violated, when values are disrespected, when the self is threatened. In trauma therapy, we learn that anger is often the missing emotion, the one that got buried beneath fear, shame, or helplessness. Children who weren't allowed to express it become adults who can't even recognize it. And without anger, we lose our internal compass. We say yes when we mean no. We tolerate the intolerable. We normalize the unacceptable. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with a purpose, we create it through choice. But what if anger is the alarm bell that tells us when we're making the wrong ones? What if it's the soul's way of rejecting a life that isn't ours? You see, the modern self is fractured. We curate identities online. We perform goodness for applause. We swallow rage to fit in, to be loved, to not be too much. We become diplomats in a world that demands warriors. And every time we mute that primal roar, we teach our psyche to settle for survival over authenticity. This is no small problem, because anger is not just an emotion, it is a signal that says, something here matters, something here is sacred, something here must change. But when that signal is ignored long enough, the system begins to decay. The anger becomes depression, the fire turns inward, and we call this mental health. But maybe the real illness is our aversion to confrontation, our cultural allergy to passion, our obsession with being liked, even at the cost of being whole. Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, imagined a society numbed by pleasure, where discomfort was eradicated and rebellion was obsolete. It was a world without anger, and therefore, without freedom. The irony? That fantasy looks a lot like the life many people live today: pleasant, productive, polished, and utterly disconnected from the animal inside them that once knew how to fight, protect, and rise. What you've been told is that anger is dangerous, that it makes you irrational, that it must be controlled. But what if the real danger is being too rational in a world gone mad? What if your anger is the only sane response to an insane system? What if it is not your wildness that needs taming, but the world that told you wildness is wrong? We live in an age of numbing, scroll, distract, self-help our way into sedation. But the more we numb, the more we forget. And anger is the one emotion that resists forgetting. It is the sacred memory of what your soul refuses to tolerate. And so, you've come to this fork in the road. On one side, the life you've always lived, safe, pleasing, manageable. On the other, a fire you don't yet understand, but can no longer ignore. You can unfeel it now, the quiet fury, the clenched truth, the heat in your bones that says, enough. But here's the dilemma. What happens when the fire you've buried for years begins to rise? Because it's not enough to know the problem. You must now face the consequence of silence. And that is where we go next. The most dangerous forces in life are not the ones that scream. They are the ones that whisper, quietly, persistently, until you forget they were ever voices at all. Anger is one of them, when ignored, when suppressed, when shamed into silence. Because when anger is denied expression, it doesn't disappear, it evolves. It becomes something far more insidious. It becomes the unseen architect of your reality. You don't realize it at first. You think you're making choices. You think you're being reasonable, level-headed, mature. But under the surface, there is a tightening, a hidden tension shaping every interaction, every decision, every boundary you failed to set. And then, one day you notice, you're tired. But not the kind of tired sleep can fix. You're agreeable, but you don't feel seen. You're successful, but there's no joy in it. You smile on the outside, but inside, there's a quiet scream. This is not my life. Because that's what happens when anger is exiled. It begins to corrode your inner world, not with fire, but with silence. You become a master of self-betrayal, so fluent in saying yes that no feels like violence. You tolerate relationships that diminish you, work that drains you, beliefs that don't belong to you. And you convince yourself that this is what it means to be a good person. But the truth is harsher. You're not being good. You're being obedient to a script you didn't write. And the cost? It's your vitality, your authenticity, your inner compass. In neuroscience, we know that repressed emotions don't vanish. They embed themselves into the body. Chronic tension, migraines, gut issues, autoimmune disorders. The body keeps score. As trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk would say, when anger is not allowed to move through you, it begins to live in you, and not just physically. Psychologically, the consequences are profound. You lose access to your own agency. You stop trusting your instincts. You begin to mistake numbness for peace. This isn't healing. It's high-functioning suppression, and our culture rewards it. You get praise for being so strong when you don't speak up, for being so patient when you don't retaliate, for being so forgiving when you allow yourself to be harmed again. But underneath the praise is a quieter truth. You are being rewarded for abandoning yourself. And then comes the spiritual consequence, perhaps the most devastating of all. You begin to lose faith, not in a god or a doctrine, but in yourself. Because somewhere deep down, the part of you that feels knows, this is not what I was meant for. You weren't born to be compliant. You were born to be whole. And that includes your anger. Cognitive psychology shows us how powerful emotional suppression is. When we suppress anger, we engage in what's known as thought suppression, actively trying not to feel or think certain things. But paradoxically, this only amplifies them. The more you push it down, the more it rules you from the shadows. It shows up as sarcasm, passive aggressiveness, irrational irritability, explosive outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere, except they didn't. They came from the vault you locked years ago. We call these bad moods, or burnout, or just being emotional, but what they really are escape attempts. And over time, these little escape attempts become patterns. Patterns become identities, and identities become prisons. You become the peacemaker, the martyr, the overachiever. You take care of everyone, except yourself. You excel at everything, except setting boundaries. You carry the emotional weight of the room, but never your own. And in the quiet of the night, when the masks fall away, you feel the hollow space where your truth used to be. Anger is not the enemy. The absence of anger is. Because when you lose your anger, you lose your ability to say, "This is not okay. That hurt me. I deserve better. This must change." Without anger, you become malleable, easy to manipulate, easier to exploit. You become the ideal citizen, the perfect employee, the agreeable partner, but not a full human being. Anger, when integrated, is what allows you to step out of roles and into truth. It gives you the courage to confront the unacceptable, to break patterns that have been in your family for generations, to walk away from comfort and into authenticity. But first, it demands that you feel the fire, not in a fit of rage, but as a quiet, smoldering truth that says, "I have been silent for too long." You see, the consequences of repressed anger are not just personal, they are systemic. A society that silences anger is a society that breeds obedience, that discourages rebellion, that encourages self-doubt over self-respect. This is how cultures maintain injustice, not through violence, but through emotional conditioning. If you can make someone ashamed of their anger, you've already won. They'll police themselves, they'll stay in line. And perhaps that's the most sinister consequence of all. A world full of people who are awake enough to feel injustice but too emotionally shackled to resist it. So the question is not, "Why am I so angry?" The real question is, what have I tolerated for so long that this anger is now the only part of me still telling the truth? You are not broken. You are not damaged. You are remembering. And that memory is sacred. But what now? What happens when you finally stop apologizing for your fire? What happens when you stop managing anger and start understanding it? You stand on the edge of something revolutionary, a rebellion of the soul. But it will not come through comfort. It will come through confrontation. You will not find freedom in a therapist's laminated worksheet, not in 10 steps to serenity, not in soft music or scented candles, because the kind of freedom we're talking about isn't peaceful at first. It's not pretty. It's not polite. It's violent in the most sacred way. Violent not in action, but in truth. A rupture, a refusal, a raw, primal awakening from the coma of compliance. This is not about anger management. This is about anger liberation. Because the first step to breaking free is not learning to calm down. It's learning to finally let your rage speak, to listen to it like an oracle, not the wounded child who lashes out, but the ancient part of you that remembers what you're made of. It begins with one sentence, one that feels like betrayal, but is actually birth. "I'm allowed to be angry." Say it again, slower this time. Let it sink in. Let it melt the ice that's frozen your voice. You're allowed to be angry. At your parents, at your job, at the partner who says, "You're too sensitive," at the world that told you to be quiet, compliant, careful. Not because anger gives you the right to destroy, but because it gives you the right to define. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, rather than what the world expects. But individuation always begins with rupture, and anger is often the scalpel that cuts away the lies. To rebel doesn't mean to destroy everything. It means to dismantle what's false so that what's real can breathe again. Think of Malcolm X, who once said, "Usually when people are sad, they don't do anything. But when they get angry, they bring about a change." He wasn't just talking about protests. He was talking about sacred disruption. And you, yes you, have been too well behaved for too long. The rebellion begins when you start asking dangerous questions like, what am I no longer willing to tolerate? Who benefits from me staying silent? What would my life look like if I stopped editing myself for approval? This is how empires fall. Not always with swords, sometimes with honesty. Rebellion begins when you stop moralizing your emotions. Anger is not good or bad. It's information. It's intelligence. It's the soul's immune system telling you where the infection is. You do not need to fix your anger. You need to understand it. Trace it to its origin. Listen for the unmet need beneath it. Use it not as a weapon, but as a compass. In the words of Audre Lorde, "My anger has meant pain to me, but it has also meant survival. And before I give it up, I'm going to be sure that there is something at least as powerful to replace it." She wasn't angry for the sake of rage. She was angry because something sacred was being denied. And so are you. Look around. You've played the roles. You've smiled through the disrespect. You've softened your truth so others could remain comfortable. And now, you're exhausted. Because performing a lie is the most draining job in the world. But rebellion means permission, not to burn bridges, but to stop walking across ones that were never meant to carry your weight. Not to scream at everyone, but to finally speak to yourself. Not to fight the world, but to stop fighting your instincts. This is where the work begins, not to numb the anger, but to alchemize it. You are not a reactor, you are a creator, and anger, when integrated, becomes the fire that forges new boundaries, new standards, new identities. It becomes power without poison, fire without frenzy, truth without apology. You reclaim it in the micro moments, saying, no, when every muscle wants to please, walking away from the familiar, even if it means being alone, telling the truth, even when your voice shakes, choosing discomfort over dishonesty. This is not about venting, it's about vision, because behind every sacred no is a deeper yes. Yes to dignity, yes to wholeness, yes to becoming someone your younger self would finally feel safe inside. Anger, when used well, becomes sacred architecture. It helps you build. Look at history. Martin Luther King Jr., angry. Harriet Tubman, angry. Jesus flipping tables in the temple, not out of cruelty, but out of divine discontent. Their anger wasn't destructive, it was directional. So what does your anger want to build? A life with no more apologies for being intense? A relationship where you don't shrink to be loved? A body that holds tension no more? A world that stops demanding your obedience in exchange for acceptance? To rebel is to restore. Restore your agency, your self-respect, your voice, your instinct. And no, it won't be easy. There will be resistance, guilt, pushback from people who only loved you when you were smaller. But hear this, your anger will protect you where your passivity never could. Let it. This rebellion is not about becoming someone new. It's about shedding who you were never meant to be. You are not becoming angry, you are becoming awake. An awakening isn't comfortable, it's confrontational. It burns, but it also purifies. So now, you stand at the edge of a new way of being. Behind you, 1,000 false selves you wore to survive. Ahead, something terrifying and holy, freedom. But the question is not whether you can handle the fire. The question is, can you handle what happens when you finally stop putting it out? Because the final realization is not just about anger, it's about truth. And truth is coming, one flame at a time. There comes a moment, quiet, unremarkable at first, when you no longer need to yell to feel powerful. Not because you've numbed your fire, but because the fire has moved inside you. It glows now, steady, certain, unapologetic. This is the moment beyond rebellion, beyond catharsis, beyond even healing. This is where truth begins. Not the kind of truth that sits politely in books, but the kind that rearranges you, the kind that undoes lies you didn't even know were there. And here it is, burning at the center of everything. Anger is not the enemy of peace, it is the doorway to it. Not because it creates peace directly, but because it clears everything that was standing in the way. What if the problem was never the anger itself? What if the real violence was in the way you were taught to fear it? Look closer. That flame inside you, the one you've tried to snuff out your whole life, is not rage. It is refusal. Refusal to be small. Refusal to be silent. Refusal to keep playing the role of someone who is always fine. That flame is truth trying to make its way out. And truth, once awakened, cannot be undone. It demands something terrifying, that you live in alignment with your needs, with your limits, with your yes and your no, with the holy complexity of being human. And this radical honesty, is the thing we've been avoiding all along. Not the pain, not the shame, but the responsibility that comes with knowing who you really are. Because when you stop suppressing anger, you start confronting the world without a mask. And suddenly, everything must change. The job that asks too much of you, you see it for what it is, exploitation dressed as duty. The relationship where you're always the emotional caretaker? It feels suffocating now, not noble. The way you talk to yourself, your own inner critic, you hear it finally, and you stop confusing it for truth. This is the final liberation. You stop making yourself wrong for wanting more respect, more dignity, more freedom, more you. Because that's what anger has been saying all along. I am not okay with this. I deserve more than this. I will not disappear to make others feel better. And once you hear that message, truly hear it, you can never go back. You begin to live differently. You speak with a voice that doesn't tremble anymore. You take up space in a room without apology. You make decisions not from fear, but from inner alignment. And you discover a strange, beautiful paradox. The more you honor your anger, the less control it has over you. Because now it doesn't need to explode. It doesn't need to sneak out sideways through passive aggression or sabotage. It can simply speak, clearly, directly, lovingly, and you listen. Because now you trust yourself enough to hold the fire without being burned. Do you understand how rare this is? How powerful? Most people live their whole lives disconnected from their truth. They call it balance. They call it adulthood. But really it's exile. a self-banishment from everything that makes them alive. But not you. You dared to question, to feel, to rage, to break, to rebuild. And now you stand in a kind of peace the world doesn't understand. Not passive peace, but sovereign peace. The kind that comes not from avoiding conflict, but from mastering it, internally, ethically, courageously. You've discovered what Carl Jung hinted at in his exploration of the shadow, that only by integrating the darker parts of ourselves can we become whole. Not perfect, not pure, but whole. You don't need to be someone's idea of enlightened. You need to be someone undeniably real. Someone who has walked through the fire and made peace with the flame, because the flame was never there to destroy you. It was there to refine you. So let the world say what it wants. Too emotional, too intense, too much. Let them say it. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to be true. And truth, my friend, is what makes you dangerous, in the best way. Because a person who is no longer afraid of their own anger is a person who cannot be manipulated. They cannot be coerced with guilt. They cannot be bribed with approval. They cannot be silenced with shame. They are free. And now so are you. Because when you finally stop seeing anger as a flaw and start seeing it as a signal, you unlock a kind of clarity that is unshakable. You begin to trust the rumble in your chest, the tightening in your gut, the quiet no that rises before your brain has time to justify. That is truth, and truth will guide you home. But here's the final realization. This journey doesn't end with feeling better. It begins with becoming real. And realness is a holy, lifelong rebellion. So the next time the fire rises, don't run, don't shame it, don't smother it with politeness. Welcome it. Ask it what it's trying to protect, what it's trying to reclaim, what it's trying to remind you of. Because behind every angry outburst is a buried boundary. Behind every clenched jaw is a self that longs to be respected. And behind every quiet fury is a soul that still dares to hope. Maybe I am worth fighting for. So now, breathe, not to calm down, but to claim space. This is your fire. This is your truth. This is your moment. And it all begins when you stop fearing your anger and start following it home.